I was always interested in humanities, and when it came to college in 1954, my mother said that no, you cannot study humanities in communism because all you learn is propaganda, and just go and study engineering or something useful, and not anything to do with literature or history. And so I ended up in I was accepted in an engineering school outside in another small town, but then I also got an acceptance at an agricultural university in Budapest, and I didn't care what it was as long as it was in Budapest. That's where I had to go, and I finished 2 years, and in my third year came the 56 uprising, which we call a revolution, not an uprising. And it came as a surprise to everybody. And I and my classmates heard about it from the big engineering university, where a big demonstration was scheduled for October 23rd. And we decided to join that march through Budapest, and I was part of that march through the city, and it was an unforgettable experience. It didn't start out with the people yelling, "Ruskis haza," Russians go home. Nobody would even think of such a thing at first. And at first we just wanted democracy, democratic elections, and democratic communism. And so it was a peaceful demonstration, but it was still something that had never happened in communism before. And I never forget that sight when we were walking through these main thoroughfares, and people opened the windows in offices and apartments and looked out, and the look on their faces was unforgettable. That it just stays with me forever. That surprise and cautious happiness that people were really afraid to look, even, to be part of this, at first. And it was a long march, and it ended up on the other side of Budapest, where we heard a talk, and by, I don't remember who, but we wanted to hear Imre Nagy, the communist leader who wanted to build communism with a human face, and he was not allowed to continue, and he got into power after Stalin died in '53, and that's Stalin's death meant an enormous change in the communist world, and they started to close down the forced labor camps, which were kind of death camps, because as Solzhenitsyn calculated, a 10-year sentence which was an average sentence, and a 10% attrition rate in the camp meant a death sentence, in effect. Your chances of surviving 10 years at that rate were really nil. And so, of course, I had not read Solzhenitsyn's books at that time, and not even Orwell's Animal Farm, but I heard about that. So it was a big change in my life when I finally got to live in Budapest and enjoy the cultural amenities of the city, namely the Opera House, where the first thing was I got a subscription sitting behind a column, but that was the cheapest seat they had. And I attended this agricultural university that I had no personal interest in at all, but acquiring a university education in whatever field was important, And for one thing, you could avoid the military service, which I wanted to do by any means possible. And in 1956, when the revolution came, I started my third year already in this university. When on September 23rd, we heard about a bigger university students organizing a march through the city demanding democratic reforms. They were not demanding a multi-party system, but they wanted more democratic elections within the Communist Party, at least as a minimal achievement. So it seemed like a safe and not too dangerous thing to do, to join this march through the city, and which started on the Buddha side with the university there, and moved to the Pest side, where we stopped, and a famous actor recited a poem there, and then we continued on a major avenue through Pest, which is a sort of semicircle, and ends up going back to the Buddha side again. And so we were in Buddha side, stopped at the statue of Bottyányi, a leader of the 1848 revolution against Habsburg oppression. And then from there we went back to the parliament, because we were hoping to hear Imre Nagy, the deposed reform communist prime minister. And so we were standing around at the parliament for a while, and finally he appeared, but then he went into the building and didn't say anything. And so finally I left the place and went to the Stalin statue. Stalin had a statue in the outskirts of of the Pest side, an enormous statue. His boots were bigger than a man, and I got to see the pulling down of this enormous bronze statue, which took quite a while because inside the statue there were steel beams that were holding it up. And so even after they cut the statue at the top of the boots, the steel beams were holding it back. So they had to put big cables on it and pull it with tractors. And finally, the huge statue fell on the ground, and I was standing there watching that, and that was great. And I thought that was a sufficient ending for my adventures, and I went back to the dormitory for the night. And then in the following morning, I joined my classmates again, and because we found out that during the night there were fighting broke out between the students and workers and the secret police, and so we went into the city. My dorm was outside the city, and indeed, when we arrived there were crowds in the streets, and there was shooting, and my first experience was that I saw from a bullet coming from such a distance that by the time it got near me, it was bouncing in the air, which happens to the end of a trajectory of a bullet. It stands, but it's still lit up and hot, so you can see it. And I stepped out of the way, and it hit somebody else, and oh, well, that was, I survived my first encounter with a bullet coming at me. And then I went to see a friend of mine who lived across the street from the radio station offices and studios. And he was not there, and his landlady said he had not come back all night. So, and then she said, well, don't go out in the streets, it's dangerous. And well, I said, I can just sit around, and by that time there were several dead bodies on the sidewalk, mostly young 16, 17-year-old teenagers, and it was pitiful, terrible sight. And I went out, and I joined a group of students who got hold of some ammunition, which was actually brought by workers, who later I found out that after work, when they heard about this demonstration, they went straight to the barracks, the Hungarian barracks, not the Soviet barracks, and they opened the barracks and they got ammunition, and that's how they came to the city with the guns and ammunition. And I ran into one of these depositories where these young people were looking at these boxes of hand grenades, and they didn't know what to do. And I explained to them, how to use, because I had some military training, and I told them to be very careful with especially those so-called corn hand grenades, the steel hand grenades that seem to be kind of have a rugged surface because they're made of steel, and they create shrapnel, and they are used for defense purposes only, and you throw it from behind some safe place and throw it at the approaching enemy. You never throw it as you run toward the enemy because you will kill yourself. And besides that, it is so dangerous that its igniting mechanism comes in a separate box. So you have to assemble this before you can use it. And so I had to explain all that to these students. But then luckily a real soldier showed up and took over from me, and I left, and I was really, as I mentioned earlier, I developed some kind of a PTSD from World War II and the constant bombardment, and it just gave me such a terrible reaction to any gunfire or bomb fire. So I just couldn't stand this, and I walked away, and I just kept walking around the city. And by the way, my first day, as I described my walking in the march and then back to the Stalin statue, is quite a long hike. If I try to retrace my steps today, I think it would have to take quite from early morning to late at night, and it would wear me out. It would take at least 25 miles, a good hike for a day. And this street fighting continued there's another very remarkable event that happened. That night I went to visit an old high school friend of mine, and in high school we never talked politics, and nobody ever talked about, it's simply you avoided the subject with your best friends. You never talk politics outside your home, and I knew that this friend, his father was a colonel in the army, but he was a physician, so he was in the medical corps, and that's why it turned out that was why he had this high rank, and that's why he was living. He got an apartment in a nice apartment house reserved for high military and secret police officials. And as it turned out, because I went there and to visit them and see what they thought was going on, I was curious, and it turned out, of course, that they supported the march and the uprising. And we were watching, and that's another sight that remains in my memory forever. I saw two trucks of Hungarian soldiers coming into the city, into the mouth of the lion, and into danger. And I could just, I could cry thinking of them. And how they had the courage to brave this situation. And the other situation, another incident in that apartment house was later when I left. And we were standing in the stairway from another apartment. A lady emerged, wringing her hands and saying that she was so worried about her husband, who was a secret police appointment, and what's happening to him, and we were just thinking, oh, well, I hope he gets what he deserves, and so, in a few more days, finally, the fighting stopped, and it looked like the revolution achieved its goal. And Indra Nagy was indeed restored to the prime minister's job, and he established a more democratic government and sent a message to the United Nations asking the United Nations to help negotiate a settlement with the withdrawal for the Soviet forces. But I don't know, the United Nations never dealt with it, but at least there was about a week or so of peace, and the happy time of it seemed like the revolution achieved its goal. But I went back to my small town home, and I saw Soviet troops pouring in, tanks, and I said, they're getting ready to attack. And indeed, on November 4th, at dawn, they attacked, and in my small town, they were, the first thing they did, they entered the military barracks where the officers were accommodated, and they killed them in their bed, and everybody, that was the Soviet method, just thorough, attack, and again, it had a curious incident. The town was very quiet, and I had to take dinner to my grandparents. My mother prepared a dinner, and to get there, I had to cross a block that was completely empty, because during the World War II, it was bombed out, and they finally cleared away the ruins, and it was an empty space. And there was no way for me to get around that emptiness, How am I going to walk there, And I managed to deliver the dinner, and then coming back, I saw in the distance up the street a Russian tank standing up there with they had a machine gun on the tanks. They had this newer type of tanks that didn't just have a gun, but had a submachine gun on top of it, and with a large gauge submachine gun. And I said, well, how am I going to avoid the attention of this tank. And I just said, well, I'm not going to crawl on the floor, on the ground, it's too far to go. And if I run, then I may look more like somebody who's trying to do something. So I started walking, and then they let go of a volley of fire on this machine gun, and it hit the house, and it almost broke down the bricks. So there were and I didn't get hit. I don't know how I managed it, avoid that volley of machine gun fire, and it was miraculous. But I went home, and my brother had a friend who came, and he stopped by, and he said that he was escaping, the country, and going to Austria, and asked my brother if he wanted to go, and my brother was not a high achiever, and didn't go to college. And I told him that, hey, listen, you don't speak any languages, and what are you going to do, abroad? How are you going to make a new life for yourself? And are you sure you want to make this big step? And then, of course, I didn't want to go because I considered myself a poet, and I couldn't lose my language. If I give up the Hungarian language, it would be like for a sculptor to give up his clay, or marble, or whatever he used to carve his statues. So I carved my poetry from Hungarian language, so I cannot give it up. I have to say, no matter what happens, no matter what my mother says, that even if poetry has to be communist, well, I can always write love poems or nature poems or something else. But I wanted to stay, and indeed I stayed, and things. The Soviets in a few days took over the country, and there was no. And then the Hungarian secret police came back again and took over. They regained power, and then the order was slowly restored, and people went back to work, and eventually I decided to check out my university in Budapest, and went to the dormitory, and I found in the dorm that it had been used for Soviet troops, and the Soviet troops had stolen whatever they could steal, it just so happened I had this family's 2 suitcases with me in there, and they were gone, and my clothes and my notes and notebooks all thrown out in a big pile with all the other things. And I said, oh, this is disgusting. How am I going to restart my studies here? And then I went to visit this friend whose father was the colonel in the army, and No, I didn't go to see him. I just called him up. I called him, and then his mother answered the phone, and she said that, "Hey, Paul, what the hell are you doing here, you know? How come you're not out west? Zoli, your friend, is already in Germany, Karlsruhe, already attending the engineering university in Karlsruhe, you know. And so you better hurry before they close the borders. It's already very dangerous to go." So, well, and she convinced me on the phone to leave the country, and said that you must go, you know, immediately. And well, it was too late to start out, but I went back and spent the night with my aunt in Budapest, and the next day I planned on escaping. But I had to go back to my hometown first. Okay. Well, we wanted to talk about the close calls I had. Actually, I wasn't doing anything heroic when it happened, and yet I was shot at. And in one case, it was shortly after in the first part of this uprising, when it started. I was at my aunt's apartment on the first floor in a busy boulevard, and a Russian personnel carrier came by with the soldiers in it shooting indiscriminately. And I was just watching that, and suddenly a bullet hit the window pane, and it went right through it. And I wouldn't believe it, but it didn't shatter the whole glass pane, but it made a little hole with just a few cracks around it. And then the bullet hit the wall, and this was about 10 inches from my head. And what was the other incident? Oh, right at the beginning of this, when on the 24th, the second day of the uprising, I went into the city, had to take the suburban train to the Keleti Pályaudvar, and we walked from there, and I ran into a big crowd of people milling around, and there was somebody up on top of a building shooting at the crowd, and then suddenly I saw a bullet. You wouldn't believe it, but I saw a bullet at the end of its trajectory, very far from its origin, and therefore it lost its momentum and spin, and it was making loops in the air, but it was still very hot, and that's why I could see it, you know. I wouldn't believe that you could see a bullet, you know. I can't even see a golf ball flying in the air, but here I saw this bullet. And a third incident that was the scariest was that on the 4th of November, that the day the Russians came back and squashed the revolution, I was in my hometown, a small town, and I had to, and the town was quiet and empty because the attacks occurred at dawn already, and the Russians attacked the main hotel of the town where all the Hungarian officers were accommodated, and they just shot them in the bed. And of course, I didn't know it at that time, and I just had to go and take this dinner to my grandparents. And unfortunately, my grandmother was not too well. She had Alzheimer's, which we didn't know at that time, and it was not known. But I delivered the dinner, and then I'm on my way back. I had to cross a big empty space where a whole block was bombed out in World War II, and they had just cleared away the ruins, so it was an empty area. And at the end of this empty area, there was a street going uphill, and then the top of the hill was a Russian tank there, sitting there, and I could see it, and I imagined that they could see me because there was nobody else on the street, and I didn't know what to do. Should I crawl on the pavement, or just run, or just, if I crawl, they can see me. I cannot hide behind the curb, and if I run, then I look suspicious. So I just tried and brazened it out, and I walked, and sure enough, the tank opened up its machine gun and let go of a big volley, and the bullets, I could see the bullets hit a house, a plastered house with a brick wall, and the brick wall was crumbling, not just the plaster. And luckily, I didn't get hit, and I made it out of there. But actually, there was a fourth incident where, again, it was a tank with that machine gun, which was a new thing at that time in the Soviet army, the machine gun mounted on its new type of tank. And I was in the phone booth making a phone call, and it was a glassed-in phone booth. And the tank came by and saw me there, and then just casually turned the machine gun toward me, and then let go of in the volley. And I crumpled down as far as I could in the telephone booth, and the glass was falling down on me. And I, for years afterwards, well, it was only 10 years later, I started coming back to Hungary, and for a while that phone booth was still there, but of course it's gone now. But it was a very scary reminder of these tanks and the casual way the Russians were just shooting in any direction, and just. We were going to talk about my escape, which I decided. Okay, and the ironic thing is that my brother, older brother, who never went to college, but his friend stopped by shortly after the 4th of November, when things looked really hopeless, and his friend stopped by and asked him to go with him to Austria, or who knows, anywhere in the world, somewhere. And I told my brother that, hey, look, you sure you want to make that big step, because you don't speak any languages? How are you going to make a living in a foreign country, in a foreign land? And so you think about that. And he said, well, okay, you may be right, and so his friend left. And next thing, I met him in New York. But first of all, I have to tell you how I got to New York. And the first step to New York was for me to go back to my hometown, which was on a direct line toward the border. And I had to stop there to ask my mother for a little cash to buy a train ticket, because I only had money enough to get to my hometown. And I felt bad about leaving my family there, because my escape might get them into trouble. They will say, hey, there is a traitor in the family, and so they were supposed to say, if I make it, and don't get shot at the border, then they were supposed to say that, oh, I just disappeared during the revolution, and that's all. And so many people disappeared. And but this was already December the 13th, and the day I stopped in my hometown to get this money. Somehow I got a message to my mother to come home, and I met her at home, and then I was looking for a map, trying to figure out which way to go. And it turned out we had no maps, because maps were not allowed. They were dangerous, in the hands of the enemy. And so I had to just get the money and go back to the railroad station. And of course, I had to say goodbye to my mother, and she said, well, son, do what you think is best, and I had to walk away and buy the railroad tickets and get on the train, thinking that I'm really betraying my brother, leaving him at home, holding the bag, in case I get into trouble. And I talked him out of it, and so this is the ironic thing, that I was doing exactly what I told my brother not to do. But on the other hand, I already had started studying English and thought maybe I would go to England, I always liked English literature, and as an aspiring poet, I thought I would love to go to England. And so I got on the train and looked around, and most people looked like they were legitimate passengers just going home. But I could pick out people who were just not, fitting the scene, and they were, I saw a couple there, and a middle-aged man with a middle-aged wife, but he looked like an intellectual, and the wife looked very nervous. And I thought, aha, those two are on their way, and so I told the man, to come out to the corridor of the train, and I'd like to talk to you for a minute. And he looked at me and said, "What the hell? Am I a policeman? Or I'm going to arrest him or something?" But he came with me, and shaking, and I said that I think you're on your way to the border, aren't you? And don't worry, I'm going with you. You know where you're going? I said, "No, but we know somebody in this last town, and we hope that they can show the way." "Oh, okay, so let's, put our eggs together, and we'll see if we..." And then he went back to the wife, and then the wife came out to the corridor. It was a crowded train, so we can talk in the compartment. And so I talked to the wife too, and she agreed that maybe there is strength in numbers, so let's, join together. And then what happened, and there's a young man in some kind of uniform, then came to me and pulled my sleeve and out to the corridor. And I said that, "Oh, you guys are conspiring, right?" And I said, "Can I join you?" I said, "Well, what kind of uniform is this?" And said, "Oh, I'm just a fireman, I said, "Then what the hell are you doing? Escaping? You're a fireman." And I said, "Oh, I want to go. I have some relatives in Austria or Germany. I don't remember where, but and I just decided to give it a chance, And he really didn't have any real plans, or I don't know why he was escaping, but well, so that made 4 of us, and then the town where we were supposed to go was already in a restricted zone along the border, and it had already been closed up again, and the conductor told us, was going through the train and telling everybody that if you don't have in your ID card stamped, the name of this town, then get off when I tell you, because the last village you have to get off, and then walk the rest of the way, because otherwise they will arrest you at the train station. And luckily, and then he found out that the last village was not raided, and we could go all the way to the last village before the town, and so we got off there, and by that time it was getting darkish, and we thought it was too late to walk through the fields and into town, and we knocked on a window somewhere in a village, and the people came out and told them that, well, we need accommodations for the night. And they said, "Well, okay," and then they gave us a slice of bread and a glass of milk for the night, and then told us to lie down on the floor and go to sleep. And so we slept there and got up early in the morning and walked into town through the fields, me carrying a briefcase on the fields. That must have looked really funny and really suspicious, except there was nobody on the fields. And we got into town, This couple, they found the man that they were hoping to get help from, and he said, well, it was Saturday, and it was a market day in town, and so there was we had to get into it. We were in the restricted zone, but there was a more restricted zone, only 2 or 3 miles along the border. And to get into that restricted, very restricted zone, the roads were already watched, and we couldn't even walk in there. And so we had to find out something else, either walk through the woods or, and then we looked around and we found a tractor trailer, a tractor with a trailer that then the trailer had brought vegetables into town, and it was pretty muddy, and it had very low sides. But if we lay down in the trailer, we were hidden from sight, perhaps. And the trailer driver, the tractor driver, agreed to take us into that very restricted zone and smuggle us in. And indeed, we got into town, and the guard on the road just waved him on, and we were safe. And so we had already crossed one hurdle, but then the next hurdle was to get to the border. So again, we had to go and just knock on another door in the village and ask them to show us the way to the border. And they said, oh, well, when the boy gets home from school, then he can show you the way. And they said, in the meantime, sit down and wait, with us. And then when he gets home, we'll have, midday meal. And that's when in Europe they have their main meal. And so we got a nice warm meal with them. And then the boy said, okay, let's go. And he took us out into some open fields, and it's not cultivated land, just but it wasn't a forest either. It had some trees and bushes, and nothing to hide behind very much. And then he took us, we walked for an hour or so, and then finally the boy said that, okay, you just keep going that way, and you'll hit the border, and turn around and disappear. And we were just standing, we didn't see anything except the same terrain, and how do we know that we keep going in straight in that direction? What if we turn the wrong way? And I said that, well, we have to pick out a bush and another one and see that that is in that direction, and then we go toward that, and then do the same thing. We always go in the same direction that way, and then. Well, it was 10, 15 minutes. Indeed, we reached suddenly reached the border. We could see the first thing we saw was the guard tower, with the machine gun at the top. It's just pointing down and on the ground, because at the border on a not illegal crossing, they don't ask for papers. They just shoot you, you know. And so, and then plus I saw a tank there. I swear I didn't know what the hell was that smaller tank just sitting there a little distance away, and there's the guard tower and the next one there. So, well, it said that, well, we have to get somebody must be up with that machine gun, you know, is watching us, you know. But my idea was, I forgot to tell you that we're not going to wait for the nightfall and to the crossing at night, because at night they will turn on these big reflector lights, you know, and then and there will be more alert for people who are escaping. And I said, let's do it in daylight. And so that's why we were there in daylight. But so we didn't see any movement on top of the tower. And I said that, well, we should just maybe run across one at a time quickly, and then they won't notice it. And so between the two towers, we managed to run across the border, and nothing happened. Nobody noticed us. And then we were in Austria, and so we walked a little ways away, and then finally the man opened up his bag and took out a bottle of brandy, and that he said he had brought the brandy to use as a bribe to the Russians, you know, in case we get stopped by the guards, border guards, and then it seemed like the Russians were guarding the border. They didn't trust the Hungarian soldiers, and even though by then this was almost near Christmas, you know, and well, so we had a sip of drink, and then we walked through the woods, and then by the time we got out of the woods, it was getting dark, but finally we got to a farmhouse in the open field, and so we walked to that farmhouse and looked at the tractor there, and it had an Austrian license plate. And I said, well, we are in the right place, you know, and knocked on the door, and then the farmer then told us to get on his tractor. He didn't have a car, just a tractor, hang on to this tractor. But he took us into the nearest village that had a refugee camp, and not really a camp, just some abandoned building where they lay down some straw on the floor and for people to sleep on, and they gave us some Salzstangel, which is this salt stick, you know, bread, and hot chocolate, you know, to drink. You know. So that was a nice supper, and went to sleep on the straw floor. And then after midnight, lights went on again, and then suddenly some other people came, and they were totally in a shock, you know, especially, I never forget this young woman, you know, was just practically, you know, comatose, you know, and they said that they started out as a group of 10 or 15, you know, in the dark, you know, and of course, you know, that they were noticed, and then shot down. Half the people were dropped dead at the border, and the rest ran across. And there's this young woman lost her young husband. They had just married, and then it was. And she said that, what is she going to do now in this world without anybody, and a young woman alone in this world? That's and it's indeed, it can be a prey to traffickers and everything. And she was going to go back to Hungary, and I asked her to take a letter for me and mail it in Hungary to my mother, so she could know that I was safe. And she took his letter, and indeed I had the letter paper with me, and I just wrote a short note to my mother that I was safe, and then she went back the next day, and indeed she mailed the letter, and my mother got it, and from then on I went from one refugee camp to another, and spent more time in Linz. And the town where we crossed the border was somewhat high, and it used to be known as Savaria in the time when the Romans ruled the area. And the first big city in Austria was Linz. And I remember Linz too, because that was the first one where I had oranges, and it was so delicious, oranges, and then from then on I always ate oranges. But then again, on the train to the Bremenhaven, all the way up, we got nothing to eat except at the train stations. Where the train stopped, the nice people, gave us oranges in chocolate. And then finally in Salzburg, spent most of the time in Salzburg at a abandoned, or it's a American base, a camp that the Americans had abandoned just a year earlier when Austria became a neutral country. And this was an ideal place for a refugee camp. It was still functioning. And this is where I could then apply for refugee status and go to England. Unfortunately, they turned me down, to go to England. It was too late. They had already too many refugees. They said, no, I could go to England only if I signed up to work in the coal mine. And I said, well, that's not why I left the country to work in the coal mine. And I said, I go to Germany or go anywhere else, And then they said, well, why not go to America? And I said, oh, this American quota is filled too, So, and they said, well, but then somehow I think Nixon had been there in that refugee camp, and then he promised to take more refugees. And so that's how I was accepted as a refugee to come to this country, and we were taken from Salzburg by an overnight train all the way across Germany up to Hamburg and then Hanover and Bremenhaven. And the Bremenhaven is where the American American naval base is. And that's where we got a World War II troop transport ship, for our transportation to the Brooklyn Navy Yard in Brooklyn. And it's a long, arduous trip across the Atlantic, in January, and it was enormous waves, and everybody's sick. Thank you.